Okay. See what I have started doing. In fact, from yesterday, that I have used another handset in a recording mode. So that is where I try to record the discussions, and the file size becomes very large, somewhere around maybe close to 90 or 100 MB, right? But yesterday I had sent the file to Mr. Ashok, who is our systems administrator in university, and I have requested him to upload the file, for the benefit of the students, so that those who somehow cannot attend the classes online, so they possibly would have a chance to listen to the discussions whenever they can access the website, right? Okay. Now, coming back, the point I was trying to discuss, that when we look at the thoughts of M.N. Roy, then we find a varied kind of influences on him. So right from Swami Vivekananda to Marxian socialism to ideas of Gandhi, and again one would find some influence of ancient Indian literature, where he would turn to find some solution to the problems which he thought would be the most pressing issue of his time. And this in his opinion was individual's freedom, right? Again, freedom of the individual was the most pressing problem of the day in his understanding, in his opinion. And after looking at all these ideas and ideologies, he would come up with his own understanding of what he says as a radical democratic state or new democracy, which would be based on his understanding of what is known as what has been very popularly associated with his name as the whole idea of radical humanism. So this is what we will try to do during the course of our discussion on M.N. Roy's thought. So first we will try to understand the way he has provided a critique to Marxism as an ideology, right? The theory of Marx, and especially the analysis of materialist interpretation of history and the whole idea of class struggle and classless and stateless society, which Marxism talks about. So therein, we'll find that he, comes up with his own idea and critique of Marxian socialism. That is one. Second thing, we'll find that during the course of his association with international communist movement, he comes in contact with Lenin, and therein, when he was asked by Lenin to prepare a draft thesis on colonial question, so therein he would provide an alternative approach to Lenin's draft. So Lenin had his own understanding on colonial question, and that is where M.N. Roy would provide an alternative view to the whole colonial question, and if at all revolution would be possible in colonial countries like India. So that would be the second thing that we would try to look at. Third, his critique of Gandhian method and Gandhian strategy of national movement, right? So this is the third thing that we'll try to discuss and look at. And finally, his whole idea of radical humanism, and which would be the basis of what he says as new democracy or radical democratic state. And then, I will try to make an assessment of his thought, make an assessment of, M.N. Roy's ideas on these, issues in a precise manner. So this is what, we intend doing. So if one looks at M.N. Roy's overall interactions and overall experiences, then M.N. Roy first came into contact with revolutionary militant groups wherein he would I would say kind of experimented that if revolutionary militant movement could be a method through which freedom can be achieved for India. And then after becoming unsuccessful or possibly maybe one can understand that he successfully manages to escape, and when he lands up in USA, then he comes into contact with Mexican Communist Party. So that's what would be his first interaction or experience with communism. And he would first become a member of Mexican Communist Party, and he participated in international communist movements as a member of Mexican Communist Party. So that is where he would, come in contact with Lenin, on the platform of international communist movement. But afterwards, he gets disillusioned with the communist practices, especially the way it was carried out in erstwhile Soviet Union or Russia. And then he decides to come back, and for close to 10 years, he remained associated with Indian National Congress. And again, he finds some problems in Congress method and some problems in Gandhian approach to India's national freedom movement. And therein, he establishes what generally would be Radical Democratic Party, right? So he establishes a Radical Democratic Party somewhere around 1940, but after 8 years, he disbands the party, and then he starts developing, his ideas, which we know as radical humanism, or his idea on new democracy, or radical democratic state, right? In between, he was also imprisoned by the British government for having conspired against it, as part of the communist conspiracy against the British rule. So that is something which would happen. But this is how one can try to look at the evolution of political thought in M.N. Roy. So the next thing we will do, we will try to look at his critique of Marxian socialism. Now, as far as M.N. Roy was concerned, he understood that as far as the human history is concerned, so there was the importance of matter in terms of bringing about changes in human history. But in M.N. Roy's thinking, the whole materialist interpretation of history, which happens in Marxism, makes it little deterministic. Now, he understands that, the way Marxism understands the stages in the evolution of history, that would become largely teleological. Teleological in the sense that it would move along a definitive path. It would move along the stages which has been predetermined. So something which he understands would make Marxian theory deterministic in nature. At the same time, he also understood that as far as Marxian understanding of history was concerned, it was also idealistic to a great extent. Now, why it would be idealistic? Primarily because you would understand that the way it takes the progress to culminate in a classless or a stateless society. So that is where he would understand that this would make the whole concept in Marxism of a classless and a stateless society to be an ideal which possibly may never be realized. And in his understanding, the experiment which happened in Soviet Union was a testimony to this fact. So the experience in M.N. Roy's understanding had established that there cannot be any stateless or classless society. Now, why it would not be so, and the larger explanations that we would look at and that I would come to. But in M.N. Roy's understanding, in the whole philosophy of Marxism, human beings had been reduced to a passive role, in a sense that in Marxism everything would be determined by the economic forces. So primarily it were the economic forces which would determine the progress in human history. But according to M.N. Roy, history has to be understood in a sense where it would capture both mental, intellectual and social aspects of human life in an integrated manner. So history in his understanding was an integral evolution of all these aspects, right? So mental aspects of human life, social aspect of human life and intellectual aspect of human life. But he accepted the importance of matter. Now, in here he would understand that the conditions in which humans would be placed that would have an influence as far as their evolution was concerned. But at the same time, he would also understand that ideas too were important. So if you recall, in Marxian socialism, ideas are considered to be part of the larger superstructure and their role would be confined to justify the existing economic relations of production. So ideas would be determined by economic relations, number one, and number two, as far as ideas were concerned, ideas would have a role to justify the existing economic relations. So this is how idea and role of ideas would be looked at within Marxism. But what Emil Roy understands that in fact Hegel was correct in terms of understanding the role of ideas, and that is where Hegel was correct also in understanding that ideas were the larger force which led to the progress of human civilization. So M.N. Roy here would follow Hegel in terms of accepting the autonomous role of ideas in influencing the changes which would happen in human history. So, initially it could be possible, according to M.N. Roy, that, ideas may emerge out of the material conditions in which humans are placed. But eventually, ideas, they would acquire their autonomy. And what we see as changes in the stages of human evolution is not simply an outcome of the forces of production or mode of production, but the class relations